Many and manifold are the dark horrors that infest the earth from its beginnings. They sleep beneath a movable stone. They grow with the tree from its roots. They stir beneath the sea and in subterranean regions. They hide in the deepest recesses. Sometimes they emerge from the decaying sepulchre of proud bronze, or from the humble pit of earth. Some of them are known to mankind from ancient times. Others still remain unknown, waiting for the terrible day of their revelation. Perhaps the most horrifying and abominable of them all have not yet manifested. But among those that have long since revealed themselves, making known their inevitable presence, there is one that, by its supreme atrocity, cannot in any way be named. The lineage that the hidden dwellers of the crypts have fathered within humanity. Abdul has written Necronomicon. In a way, it is a mercy that the story I must now tell is, for the most part, only a heap of indistinct shadows, blurred insinuations, and vague deductions. Otherwise, it could never be written by human hand, nor read by mortal eye. My brief involvement in the dreadful drama was limited only to its final act. Its earlier scenes were always, to me, no more than part of a remote and shadowy legend. Yet even so, the shattered reflection of those supernatural horrors has thrown the main events of my ordinary life out of proportion, making them seem no more than fragile cobwebs spun along the dark edges of some vast abyss, whipped by unceasing winds. Or of some half-open crypt, whose deep interior leaks the blackest corruptions of the earth. The legend I mean was known to me since childhood as something spoken in whispers and confirmed by silent nods. Sir John Tremont had once been my father's classmate, though I had never seen Sir John, nor visited Tremont Hall. It was not until the very moment when events began, events that would form the final act of the tragedy, that I ever found myself near that name. My father took me with him when we emigrated from England to Canada, while I was still a child. He prospered as a beekeeper in Manitoba. After my arrival, the years of tending the hives kept me occupied and prevented me from fulfilling my longed-for dream of visiting my native land, exploring its rural districts. When I finally managed to make the trip, little remained of that earlier life in my memory, and Tremont Hall was in no way part of my itinerary when I decided to ride a motorcycle through the typical English counties. In any case, I would never have been drawn to that mansion out of morbid curiosity like some others might have been. Curiosity the legend could easily have stirred. My visit there was purely accidental. I had forgotten the exact location, and I never imagined I might find myself in its vicinity. Had I known, I believe I would have taken another road, despite the circumstances that pushed me to seek shelter, rather than become entangled in the nearly demonic misery of its owner. When I arrived at Tremont Hall, it was the beginning of autumn, an evening already falling into twilight. The whole day had been spent winding through rolling country laced with idle lanes and serpentine roads. The day itself had been splendid, with pale blue skies shining over noble parks stained with the first ambers and crimsons of the season. But as the afternoon wore on, mist rising from the ocean began to spread across low hills, until it finally wrapped me in spectral rings. In that deceptive fog I somehow lost my way, unable to see the sign that would have guided me toward the town where I planned to spend the night. I went on for a time at random, expecting that soon I would come upon another fork. The road was little more than a rough neighbor's track, and it was strangely empty. The mist thickened and darkened, blotting out the horizon entirely. From what little I could make out, the landscape seemed made of brush and scattered rocks, showing no trace of cultivation. I climbed up over a rise of mounds and then descended a long, monotonous slope, while the fog continued to grow denser with the approach of dusk. I supposed I was heading west, but in the uncertain darkness there was not the faintest gleam or color to indicate the drowned sunset. A wet, briny smell reached me before I saw anything. The road curved very sharply, and I felt as if the world around me had become nothing but undulating bog. Night fell with almost supernatural speed, as though it had been hurried to catch me, and I began to experience a vague uneasiness, an alarm, as if I had wandered into regions far more dubious and strange than any simple English county. The mist and the fading light seemed to cloak a silent landscape of mortal, cold, perturbing mystery. A little ahead, to the left of the road, I saw a glimmer, somehow suggesting the idea of a funeral eye, blurred by tears. It shone between dark and uncertain silhouettes that appeared to be the trees of a spectral wood. One of the nearest shadows, as I approached, resolved itself into a small building. It seemed to guard the entrance of an estate. Everything was dark and apparently unoccupied. Stopping to look, I noticed the outline of an iron gate set within an untrimmed yew hedge. The entire property carried a look of desolation and neglect. As I came closer, I felt again, to the marrow, the same chill shudder that the invisibility of those marshes had caused me in that tenebrous, twisted fog. Yet the light promised something human in such lonely places. It might mean shelter for the night, or at least finding someone who could tell me the direction to the nearest village or inn. To my surprise, the gate was not closed. It swung inward with a squeal of rust and iron, as though it were the first time anyone had opened it in years. Pushing my motorcycle before me, I followed a narrow, overgrown path toward the light. Before long, a dim silhouette of a vast mansion cut itself into view among trees and tangled shrubs. The fog had become a cold misting rain. In the deepening blackness, nearly by feeling, I found a dark door set some distance from the window that let out that solitary light. I knocked 3 times, and in answer I at last heard the dull sound of slow, dragging footsteps. The door opened with a slowness that suggested caution or reluctance. Then I saw an old man standing there, a lantern or candle burning in his hand. His fingers trembled, whether from paralysis or decrepitude. Monstrous shadows moved behind him in the gloom of a corridor, flitting against his wrinkled features like wings of ominous bats. "What do you want, sir?" he asked. His voice, though it trembled and faltered, was in no way harsh. It did not at all suggest the suspicion and absolute unwelcoming attitude I had begun to expect. And yet, within it I detected a certain shadow of hesitation and doubt. As he listened to my account of the circumstances that had led me to strike his solitary door, I noticed how sharply he studied me, disproving my first impression of extreme old age. "I knew you would be a stranger in these parts," he said when I finished. "But may I ask your name, sir?" "My name is Henry Calden." "Are you not the son of Mr. Arthur Calden?" Thrown by his words, I recognized that Arthur Calden was my father. "You look very much like him," the old man said. Mr. Calden and Sir John Tremont had been great friends long ago until Sir John's father left for Canada. "Would you come in, please? You are in Tremont Hall. Sir John has not had the habit of receiving visitors for a long time, but I will tell him you are here, and he may wish to see you." Shaken, and not entirely in an unpleasant way, by this discovery, I followed the old man into a study crowded with books. Its furniture displayed both luxury and abandonment. He lit an ancient oil lamp, screen painted and dusty, and left me alone among the volumes thick with powder. At first I began to feel a strange pressure in my thoughts, an oppressive intuition, while I waited under the lamp's sickly yellow light. Then the gruesome details of that horrible, singular history, nearly forgotten, returned to my mind. My father had told me about it when I was a child. Lady Agatha Tremont, Sir John's wife, began during the first year of their marriage to fall victim to cataleptic attacks. The third attack, apparently, ended in death. She did not revive after the usual interval, and she developed all the typical signs of rigor mortis. Her body, therefore, was taken to the family vault, carved into a hill behind the mansion. The place was almost legendary in its age and vastness. The day after the burial, Sir John, tormented by a curious and persistent doubt about the certainty of the medical judgment, returned to the vault at just the right moment to hear, from within its depths, a wild, tearing scream. When he entered, he found Lady Agatha standing up in an open coffin. The lid, which had been secured with nails, lay on the stone floor. It seemed impossible that such a delicate woman could have torn it free. No other plausible explanation existed. Even Lady Agatha herself could shed very little light on the circumstances of her strange resurrection. Distraught and almost delirious, living in a state of unspeakable horror that was easily understood, she told a confused account of what she had experienced. She did not seem to remember struggling to free herself from the coffin. Instead, she was deeply disturbed by memories of a pale, half-human face she had seen when she woke in the darkness. She insisted it was the sight of that face leaning over her in the open coffin that made her scream so terribly. The being vanished just before Sir John approached, fleeing swiftly toward inner crypts. She could form hardly any idea of its general appearance. Still, she believed it was very tall and very pale, and that it had run on all fours like an animal, though its limbs seemed human. Naturally, her tale was dismissed as a dream, or the product of delirium caused by the terrible trauma of the experience. But the memory of the ghastly face, the repulsive form of the figure, became a permanent obsession. She never truly recovered. She continued living in an abominable state of physical and mental decline, and 9 months later she died giving birth to a child. Her death was, in a sense, merciful, because the child, it seemed, was one of those terrifying monsters that appear now and then among humankind. No one knew the exact nature of its anomaly, though rumors spread, horrifying as they were contradictory, from doctor, nurses, and servants who had seen it. Some servants even fled Tremont Hall and refused to return after merely getting a glimpse of the monstrosity. After Lady Agatha's death, Sir John withdrew from social life. Little or nothing was known of his activities thereafter or of the fate of the horrible child. It was said, however, that he kept it locked away in a room with barred windows, one that only he entered. The tragedy had shattered his life. He lived alone with 1 or 2 faithful servants, letting his property decline pitifully into complete neglect. I thought then that the old man who had recognized me must have been one of those who remained. While I was still struggling to hold those details in my mind, details I had nearly forgotten, I heard the sound of footsteps returning. Their slowness and weakness made me assume it was the old man coming back. But I was wrong. The person who entered was nothing less than Sir John Tremont himself. His tall figure, slightly stooped, his face wrinkled as though by some corrosive touch, revealed a dignity that seemed to triumph over both the catastrophe of illness and the mortal affliction of grief. Somehow, though I might have guessed his real age, part of me had expected to meet an old man. Yet Sir John was a man who barely passed beyond middle age. His pallor, death-like in its intensity, and his unsteady tread told another story. The gait of someone suffering from a fatal disease. His manners, when he addressed me, were impeccably courteous. But his voice sounded like the voice of someone for whom ordinary human relationships had long since become indifferent and meaningless. "Mr. Harper tells me you are the son of my old classmate Arthur Calden," he said. "You are welcome to such poor hospitality as I can offer. It has been many years since I have received visitors, and I fear you will find the hall gloomy and shabby, and you might even mistake me for a bad host. Still," he continued, "you must stay at least for tonight. Harper is already preparing dinner." "You are very kind," I replied. "However, I would not wish to inconvenience you in any way," I said firmly. "You must stay," Sir John insisted. "There are miles to the nearest inn, and the fog is turning into a steady rain." In truth, he added, and I could hear something almost like relief in the words, "I am glad you are here. I hope you can tell me everything you and your father went through while we eat. In the meantime, I will try to find you a room, if you will do me the favor of following me." He led me upstairs through the mansion and along a long corridor of ancient oak beams and panels. We passed several doors that must open onto bedrooms. All were shut. One of them was reinforced with heavy iron bars, heavy, dark, and sinister, like those of a dungeon. I could not help imagining that this was the chamber where the monstrous thing had once been kept, and I wondered whether the abnormal creature might still be alive after some 30 years. Just before we reached it, a sound rose suddenly, an abrupt, tearing scream, from the barred room. It began as a prolonged wail, muffled at first like a demon's voice breaking out of a tomb. Then it rose, gradually and abominably, until it reached a piercing, uncontrollable fury, as though the demon had surfaced after passing through a series of underground passages. It was not a voice that could be called either human or animal. It was something utterly preternatural, infernal, macabre. My whole body trembled. I was seized by an unbearable terror that remained even after the voice, having climbed to its highest pitch, fell again down a descending scale into deep, sepulchral silence. Sir John gave no sign that he had even noticed. He continued with his usual unsteady step. When we reached the end of the hall, he stopped in front of the second chamber, counting from the barred door. "I will give you this room," he said. "It is the next one to mine." He did not look back at me. His voice was strangely restrained, as if stripped of life. I understood, without any further shudder, but with no less certainty, that the room he had indicated for me was contiguous to the chamber from which that terrible howling had seemed to come. It was plain that the room to which he brought me had not been used for years. A cold, stagnant, unhealthy air lay over it. A penetrating smell of damp rot filled my breath. Upon the old furniture the inevitable gathering of dust and cobwebs had already formed. Sir John began to apologize immediately. "I had no precise idea of the condition of this room," he assured me. "After dinner, I will tell Harper to come up, remove the dust, give it a general clearing, and put fresh linen on the bed." "I protest," I said, assuring him he need not apologize. The inhuman loneliness of that decrepit mansion, its decades of abandonment, and the desolation of its owner had struck me far more deeply than I had expected. I could not bring myself to speculate too much about the abominable secret of that barred chamber, or about the infernal howling whose echoes still seemed to rattle in my nerves. I was already regretting the singular accident that had led me into this demonic dwelling of perverse, oozing shadows. I felt an urgent desire to leave, to continue my journey even with the freezing autumn rain and the wind-driven night. Yet no excuse came to me that would be plausible enough. Clearly, I had no choice but to stay. Dinner was brought by the old man whom Sir John had named Harper. We dined in a gloomy but stately room. The food was simple, but solid, well prepared, and served with flawless care. I began to suspect that Harper was the only servant, part chamber help, part butler, part cook, and all of it in one. Despite my hunger and despite the care my host took to make me comfortable, the meal was solemn, almost funereal. I could not forget, not for an instant, the story my father had told. Nor could I forget the barred door and that malignant howling. Whatever it was, the monstrosity was still alive. Each time I looked at Sir John's handsome, well-groomed, almost aristocratic face, I felt again a complicated mixture of admiration, pity, and horror, admiring the strength with which he seemed to have endured those inconceivable trials. After dinner, an excellent bottle of sherry was brought in. The conversation stretched into another hour. Sir John spoke for a while about my father, though he did not know of his death beforehand. With subtle skill and tact, he had me tell him about my own affairs, like a courteous man of the world. He spoke little about himself. There was no mention, even the faintest hint, of the tragic history from which I had only just formed a general idea. Because I am generally temperate and did not empty my glass often, most of the sherry was drunk by my host. Toward the end of the evening, that strong wine seemed to draw out a strange disposition in him toward greater frankness. He began by referring to the lack of health so obvious in his appearance. He told me he suffered from a very serious heart disease known as angina pectoris, and that he had recently recovered from an unusually severe attack. "The next one will finish me," he said. "And it may come at any time, perhaps even tonight." He made the announcement with simple calm, as though speaking of a common subject or offering an ordinary weather prediction. Then, after a short pause, his words heavier, more weighted, he continued. "Perhaps I may seem strange to you, but I have a fixed aversion to being buried in a tomb or in a family vault. I want my remains to be cremated, and I have left careful instructions to ensure my wishes are carried out to the letter. Harper will see to it. Fire," he added, speaking at length with a grim conviction, "is the purest and cleanest of all the elements. It shortens those odious processes that lie between death and final disintegration. I cannot bear the idea of a moldy grave infested with worms." He spoke on and on for a long time, with a singular elaboration and a clear solidity of reasoning, so clear that it could only have been a familiar line of thought for him. It seemed to exercise a morbid fascination over his mind. I could not fail to notice a painful gleam in his eyes and a touch of tightly restrained hysteria in his voice while he spoke. I remembered Lady Agatha's burial and her tragic return, as well as that uncertain, half-delirious horror of the crypts, which had been part of the story in a way both inexplicable and vaguely unsettling. It was not difficult to understand Sir John's version of what had happened to her burial. Yet I was still far from suspecting the full infernal horror on which his repulsion had been founded. After the sherry, Harper vanished for a while to complete whatever preparations were needed for my room. Now, as then, it is useless to search. There are mysteries, God willing, that will never be probed by man. All we know is that the lineage of the crypts has returned to the crypts. That it remains there. Silently, within my shaken heart, I repeated his final words and his desire.